You don't belong here." The words cracked through the quiet first-class cabin, like a glass shattering on marble. Several heads turned. A businessman, halfway through opening a newspaper, froze. The soft hum of the aircraft's auxiliary power unit seemed suddenly louder, vibrating through the floor beneath polished leather seats. Even the flight attendant near the galley stopped mid-step, sensing the shift in the air. The woman standing in the aisle didn't lower her voice. "And you certainly don't belong in that seat." She said it again. Slower this time. Sharper. Her manicured finger pointed directly at seat 1A. At the man sitting in it. Daniel Whitmore did not move. He simply looked up from the paperback resting on his lap, one hand still loosely holding the edge of the page, as if the interruption were nothing more than a passing inconvenience. 44 years old, 6'2", broad shoulders that carried quiet weight instead of showy strength. His navy blazer had softened at the seams from years of wear. Under it, a simple grey T-shirt, the kind 1,000 men wore through airport terminals every day without anyone giving them a second glance. His leather duffel bag sat in the overhead bin above him, scuffed, old, the corners worn pale from decades of travel. Nothing about him looked like first class. Nothing about him looked like power. That was the mistake. The woman standing in the aisle was Lauren Caldwell, 38. Perfectly styled blonde hair that refused to move even in the dry, recycled cabin air. A white designer jacket, tailored so sharply it looked like armor. Sunglasses pushed up on her head like a crown. She stood there with one hand on her hip, lips pressed into a thin line of disbelief. Behind her, passengers were beginning to lean slightly into the aisle, curiosity pulling them closer to the tension like gravity. Daniel looked at her calmly. "Can I help you?" Lauren let out a small laugh that wasn't humor. It was disbelief. "You can start by getting out of my seat." The sentence landed like a slap. Daniel glanced down at the boarding pass, still resting on the armrest beside him, then back up at her. "I don't think so," he said quietly. "This seat matches the number on my ticket." Lauren tilted her head, studying him the way someone studies a receipt they know must be wrong. "Oh, honey," she said softly, the condescension dripping from every syllable. "That's cute." She reached out and tapped the back of Daniel's seat with one manicured nail. "This is seat 1A. First-class bulkhead. I booked it weeks ago." Her eyes moved slowly over him. The blazer, the T-shirt, the worn bag overhead. Her expression hardened. "You clearly got lucky with an upgrade or something." "It happens." Daniel's expression did not change. "I paid for the seat," he replied. Lauren laughed again. Louder this time. The businessman across the aisle lowered his newspaper halfway. Lauren leaned closer. "No," she said, voice dropping into a sharp whisper that still carried across the cabin. "You didn't." She reached into her purse, a sleek black clutch that looked like it cost more than most people's rent. Out came a crisp $100 bill. She waved it gently in front of Daniel's face. "Take this," she said. "Go back to 4B. The drinks are free there too. Everybody wins." For a moment, nobody breathed. The cabin had gone completely still. Daniel looked at the bill, then at her eyes. He didn't blink. "Put your money away." His voice was soft, controlled. "And step back." Lauren's smile vanished. The refusal hit her like a personal insult. "You don't seem to understand how this works," she said, straightening to her full height. "I'm a Diamond Elite member with this airline. My husband and I have been flying this route for over 20 years. She snapped her fingers once in the air. Sharp, loud. A flight attendant turned immediately. "There's a problem here," Lauren announced, gesturing toward Daniel like he was a piece of luggage left in the aisle. "This man is sitting in my seat and refusing to move." The flight attendant approached quickly. "Rachel Morgan, 41. 15 years in the sky." The calm efficiency of someone who had spent half her life managing people in confined spaces at 30,000 feet. She looked from Lauren to Daniel. "Ma'am," Rachel said carefully. "Seat 1A is assigned to this passenger." Lauren stared at her. "No," she said flatly. "It isn't." Rachel glanced at the tablet in her hand. "Yes, it is." Lauren leaned closer, lowering her voice, but not enough to hide the irritation. "Look at him." The words came out slow, cold. "He's probably standby. Or staff flying non-rev." Several passengers exchanged uncomfortable glances. Daniel slowly closed his book. The soft thud of paper against the tray table sounded louder than it should have. The warmth had left his eyes. "Rachel," he said, reading the name from her badge. "Yes, sir. Is the cockpit door open?" Rachel blinked. The question made no sense in the context of the argument. "Yes," she said slowly. "The captain is running pre-flight checks." Daniel nodded once. "Good." He unbuckled his seatbelt. The quiet click echoed in the silence. Lauren crossed her arms, amused now. "Oh, please," she scoffed. "You're going to go complain to the pilot?" Daniel stood. He towered slightly over her. 6'2" of stillness. He didn't raise his voice. "I'm not complaining." Lauren smirked. "Then what exactly are you doing?" Daniel reached into the inside pocket of his blazer. The motion was slow, calm. Lauren flinched instinctively. The businessman across the aisle leaned forward slightly. Daniel pulled out a small, matte black card. No photo, no numbers. Just a thin silver magnetic strip and a holographic falcon stamped into the corner. Rachel's eyes widened. Her breath caught. She knew that symbol. Every employee in the company knew that symbol. It was not a loyalty card. It was not a corporate pass. It was the master clearance badge issued to exactly one person. Daniel Whitmore held the card between two fingers and showed it to her. "Rachel," he said quietly. "Yes, sir. Please inform Captain Brooks that Daniel Whitmore is on board." Rachel's face drained of color. Lauren rolled her eyes dramatically. "Who cares?" she muttered. "I don't care if your name is Abraham Lincoln." Daniel didn't look at her. His voice stayed calm. "And tell him," he continued, "to shut down the engines." The cabin fell into a silence so heavy it felt physical. Rachel stepped backward toward the cockpit, as if pulled by gravity. Lauren laughed under her breath. "You are unbelievable." But 3 rows away, the businessman in seat 1B slowly lowered his newspaper all the way. Because suddenly he understood something Lauren Caldwell had completely missed. The man in seat 1A had not raised his voice once. He had not argued. He had not begged. He had simply asked for the engines to stop. And in the world of aviation, there was only one kind of person who could say that and expect the entire aircraft to obey. The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then the aircraft went dark. Not completely. The overhead lights dimmed first, fading from the warm golden cabin glow to a colder emergency hue. The air vents stopped whispering. The low electric hum beneath the floorboards cut off like someone had pulled a plug from the wall. The plane had just powered down. Passengers in the main cabin murmured in confusion. A few stood up instinctively before flight attendants motioned them back into their seats. Somewhere in the rear of the aircraft, a child asked loudly why the plane had stopped. But in first class, nobody moved. Lauren Caldwell blinked. Her eyes darted around the cabin as if the sudden silence were some kind of theatrical trick. "Really?" she scoffed under her breath. "You think you can just—" The cockpit door burst open. Captain Michael Brooks stepped out with the kind of speed that did not belong in the calm choreography of pre-flight routine. 55 years old, silver hair cut tight, 4 stripes on his shoulders that represented more than 30,000 hours in the air. His expression was already irritated before he even spoke. "Who exactly is delaying my—" Then he saw the man standing beside seat 1A. The sentence died in his throat. Captain Brooks froze. He had never met Daniel Whitmore in person, but every pilot in the fleet had watched the corporate briefing videos. They had seen the interviews. The emergency address to employees 3 years earlier, when Whitmore Aviation had pulled the airline out of near bankruptcy. They all knew the face of the man who signed their paychecks. The transformation in the captain's posture was immediate. His shoulders straightened. His jaw tightened. The irritation drained from his expression and was replaced by something much closer to military respect. He removed his cap. "Mr. Whitmore." The name landed like thunder. Lauren Caldwell felt the temperature in her chest drop 10 degrees. Captain Brooks stepped forward quickly. "Sir, I was not informed you were on this flight." "That was intentional," Daniel replied. His tone remained level. Calm, almost bored. Lauren looked from Daniel to the captain and back again. The pieces in her mind refused to fit together. "No," she said quietly. "No, that's ridiculous." Captain Brooks glanced toward her with a brief flash of annoyance. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to—" "Wait," Lauren pointed at Daniel. "You know him?" The captain's patience thinned visibly. "Yes." "From where?" Captain Brooks hesitated for exactly half a second. Then he said it. "This is Daniel Whitmore, chairman of Whitmore Aviation." The words hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. Lauren staggered back a step until her shoulder touched the wall beside the bulkhead. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. "That's not possible." Her eyes ran over Daniel again, desperately searching for the expensive watch, the designer luggage, the $1,000 suit that would make the reality easier to accept. Instead, she saw the same worn leather duffel bag, the same faded blazer, the same calm expression. "No," she whispered. "He looks like—" Daniel's gaze shifted to her for the first time since the captain arrived. "What exactly do I look like, Miss Caldwell?" Her throat tightened. The question was quiet, but there was something sharp under it, something surgical. Lauren's voice came out smaller now. I didn't mean... Daniel looked back to the captain. Captain Brooks. Yes, sir. We have a security issue on board. The word security rippled through the cabin like a sudden gust of wind. Captain Brooks's face hardened. What kind of issue? Daniel gestured calmly toward Lauren. This passenger attempted to bribe another traveler to give up a seat that was not hers. Lauren's head snapped up. That's not what happened, Daniel continued as if she hadn't spoken. She used abusive language toward your flight crew. Rachel Morgan stood near the cockpit door, arms folded, watching. And, Daniel added softly, she made racially motivated assumptions about my presence in this cabin. Lauren's face flushed crimson. That's a lie. Captain Brooks' jaw tightened. Daniel folded his hands behind his back. I do not feel comfortable flying with someone who behaves that way toward your staff or toward other passengers. Lauren stepped forward again, panic starting to fracture the arrogance in her voice. This is insane. I'm a Diamond Elite member. My family has been flying with this airline for 20 years. Daniel turned toward her slowly. You were a Diamond Elite member. Lauren froze. Daniel reached into his pocket again and removed his phone. The movement was deliberate, controlled. He tapped the screen once and placed the phone on speaker. Operations. A crisp voice answered immediately. Whitmore Aviation Operations Center. This is Daniel Whitmore. There was a brief pause on the other end. Then the voice straightened. Yes, sir. I need you to access the passenger manifest for Flight 402 to Zurich. One moment. Lauren's breathing had grown shallow. She looked around the cabin for support, for sympathy. But the passengers watching her now looked less curious, more judgmental. The businessman in seat 1B leaned back in his chair slowly, arms crossed. Found it, sir, the voice said from the phone. Locate Caldwell, Lauren. Located. Daniel's eyes never left her face. Revoke her loyalty status. Lauren gasped. You can't do that. Immediately, Daniel continued. Cancel all accumulated miles. Her mouth opened wider. Flag her profile. She is placed on the no-fly list across Whitmore Aviation and all subsidiary carriers, effective immediately. Rachel inhaled quietly. Several passengers exchanged stunned glances. Refund her ticket, Daniel finished. We don't want her money. Lauren's knees felt weak. This is illegal. The voice on the phone remained professional. Understood, sir. Completed. Daniel ended the call. Lauren stared at him as if the world had tilted sideways. You just destroyed my travel account. Daniel finally allowed a trace of emotion to enter his voice. You destroyed it yourself. Sirens sounded faintly outside the aircraft. The red and blue lights reflected across the windows of the cabin like silent lightning. Lauren turned toward the window slowly. No. Captain Brooks spoke into his shoulder radio. Security has arrived. Daniel adjusted the sleeve of his blazer. I believe Miss Caldwell will need assistance leaving my aircraft. The cabin door opened. 2 Port Authority police officers stepped onto the plane. The lead officer looked around the tense cabin. Is there a problem here? Daniel stepped forward. Yes, officer. He gestured calmly toward Lauren. This woman is trespassing on my aircraft. Lauren's voice snapped back to life in a desperate scream. You can't arrest me. Do you know who my lawyer is? The officer calmly took her wrist. "You can tell him about it at the precinct." The handcuffs clicked shut, and for the first time since she boarded the aircraft, Lauren Caldwell realized something terrifying. The man she had tried to bribe with a $100 bill owned the entire sky she had just tried to bully her way through. Lauren Caldwell screamed as the officers pulled her arms behind her back. The sound ripped through the first-class cabin, high and sharp, the kind of sound people make when the ground suddenly disappears beneath their feet. "Get your hands off me! You can't touch me! I have rights!" The officer didn't raise his voice. He had heard this tone before, dozens of times, usually from people who had just realized that their influence ended exactly where the law began. "Ma'am," he said calmly, securing the cuffs, "you can explain everything downtown." The metallic click echoed in the quiet cabin like a judge's gavel. Passengers watched with a mixture of fascination and discomfort as Lauren was turned toward the aisle. Her perfect hair had slipped slightly out of place. The expensive jacket now looked less like armor and more like a costume that had stopped working. She twisted toward Daniel Whitmore, eyes burning. "This isn't over," she hissed. "You're going to regret this." Daniel didn't answer. He had already sat back down in seat 1A, picking up his book as if the entire confrontation had been nothing more than a minor turbulence bump on an otherwise calm flight. The officers guided Lauren toward the aircraft door. As she passed through the aisle of first class, she looked for support from the other passengers. Sympathy, outrage, anything. But the expressions staring back at her were cool. Some looked embarrassed for her, others looked quietly satisfied. One older man near the window gave a slow shake of his head. Lauren felt the burn of humiliation spreading through her chest like acid. The officers moved her past the curtain, separating first class from the rest of the plane. Curious faces turned from every direction. Phones lifted, cameras blinking. The spectacle traveled through the cabin like electricity. Back in first class, silence returned with a strange heaviness. Captain Brooks cleared his throat. "Sir, do you still wish to hold the aircraft?" Daniel Whitmore turned a page in his book slowly, as if considering a menu rather than the fate of an international flight. Then he looked up. "No, Captain. Let's not punish the other passengers any longer than necessary." Brooks nodded with visible relief. "Understood." He turned toward the cockpit, but paused for a moment. "And thank you for addressing the situation." Daniel gave a small nod. The captain disappeared back behind the cockpit door. Rachel Morgan remained standing near the galley, still processing everything she had just witnessed. Daniel noticed her hesitation. "Rachel?" She straightened immediately. "Yes, sir." "How much time did we lose?" "Approximately 20 minutes, sir." Daniel considered that quietly. The businessman across the aisle shifted in his seat, watching with open curiosity now. Everyone in the cabin was waiting. Daniel stood up again. He reached for the intercom phone mounted near the cockpit door. His reflection briefly caught in the polished chrome panel beside it. For a moment, the passengers saw not just a man in a worn blazer, but someone else entirely. Someone whose quiet presence had just stopped an aircraft in its tracks. Daniel lifted the handset. The soft chime sounded through the entire plane. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice carried through the cabin speakers, deep and steady. Conversations died instantly. "This is Daniel Whitmore speaking." A ripple of whispers spread down the aisles. The name traveled faster than the sound of the engines restarting outside. "First, I want to apologize for the delay." He paused. The weight of the moment settled over the cabin. Nobody enjoys sitting on a runway when they have somewhere important to be. A few passengers gave quiet laughs of relief. Daniel continued. "To make up for the inconvenience, I've asked the crew to authorize complimentary Wi-Fi and premium beverages for every passenger on this flight. Every cabin class." The announcement moved through the plane like sunlight breaking through clouds. From the back rows came scattered cheers. A few people clapped. The tension that had filled the cabin minutes earlier began dissolving. Daniel hung up the phone and returned it to its cradle. Then he turned, not toward seat 1A, but toward the aisle leading to the back of the plane. Rachel watched him with curiosity. "Sir?" Daniel slipped his hands into his blazer pockets. "We have an empty seat in business class now." Rachel nodded slowly. "Yes, sir. Seat 4B." Daniel gave a faint smile. It would be a shame to waste it. He stepped through the curtain separating first class from the rest of the aircraft. The difference in atmosphere was immediate. The lighting was slightly dimmer, the seats tighter, the air warmer with the scent of coffee and long travel days. Passengers who had only heard fragments of the earlier confrontation now saw the man responsible for it, walking calmly down the aisle. Whispers followed him. Some people recognized his face from magazines or interviews. Others simply sensed that something unusual was unfolding. Daniel walked slowly, scanning the rows with the quiet attention of someone searching for a detail others would miss. Row 20, row 25, row 30. His pace slowed near row 34. In the middle seat sat a young woman in her early 20s, brown hair tied back loosely, a worn university sweatshirt pulled over her shoulders. She was hunched over a stack of flashcards balanced on the small tray table, whispering medical terms under her breath, while the passenger beside her snored softly against the window. Daniel stopped. He glanced down at the backpack under the seat in front of her. A small stitched label read, "Emily Parker, Johns Hopkins, School of Medicine." The young woman noticed the shadow beside her and looked up quickly. For a moment, her eyes widened in recognition. She had heard the announcement. She knew exactly who was standing there. "Oh," she said quietly, scrambling to clear space on the tray table. "I'm sorry if I'm in the aisle." Daniel shook his head gently. "Not at all." His voice softened slightly, losing the sharp edge it had carried earlier. "You're studying?" Emily nodded, embarrassed. "Trying to. I have a fellowship interview tomorrow in Geneva." She glanced down at her flashcards again. "It's a lot." Daniel leaned slightly against the seat beside her. "You flew economy to save money, didn't you?" Emily gave a small, sheepish smile. "Medical school loans don't exactly leave room for first class." A few nearby passengers leaned closer, sensing something about to happen. Daniel looked toward the front of the plane, then back at her. "Miss Parker." She blinked. "Yes." Daniel gestured gently up the aisle. "Pack your things." Emily frowned in confusion. "Why?" Daniel's expression remained calm, but there was a warmth in his eyes now that hadn't been there before. Because someone who studies that hard shouldn't have to do it in a middle seat. Emily's brain took a moment to catch up with the meaning. When it did, her mouth fell open slightly. Daniel nodded toward to the front of the aircraft. Seat 4B is empty. The passengers in the surrounding rows began smiling even before Emily spoke again. You mean? Daniel gave a small shrug. I need someone up there who actually appreciates the opportunity. Emily's eyes filled with sudden tears. Around them, hands began clapping softly, the sound growing row by row as the realization spread. And for the second time that day, the entire plane watched as Daniel Whitmore quietly turned a seat that had caused so much arrogance into something entirely different, a reward for someone who had never asked for it. Emily Parker stared at him as if the sentence had come from another universe. You're serious? Her voice was barely above a whisper. Daniel Whitmore gave a small nod, the same calm expression still resting on his face. Very. The young woman's hands trembled as she gathered her flashcards from the tray table. A few slipped to the floor and scattered across the aisle. The man beside her woke with a start as the clapping around them grew louder. Emily crouched quickly to pick them up, her cheeks flushed with disbelief. I can't take someone else's seat, she said nervously. Daniel crouched beside her and handed her one of the cards that had slid under the neighboring seat. It's not someone else's anymore. The people in the surrounding rows began smiling. One older woman in the aisle seat leaned over and whispered, Honey, if he's offering you a first-class seat, you'd better take it. Emily stood, clutching her backpack to her chest, as if it contained everything she owned. Daniel reached up to the overhead bin and lifted the worn backpack down himself. It looked small in his hands. The applause followed them as they began walking up the aisle together. Phones appeared again. Some passengers recorded quietly. Others simply watched, absorbing the rare moment when kindness replaced the tension that had filled the aircraft earlier. When they reached the curtain dividing the cabins, Rachel Morgan was already waiting. Her eyes softened when she saw Emily's stunned expression. Welcome to business class, Rachel said gently. Emily glanced around the spacious seats with wide eyes, as if she had stepped into a different world. Daniel gestured toward seat 4B. There it is. The seat Lauren Caldwell had fought so hard to claim now waited empty, bathed in soft cabin lighting. Emily lowered herself into it slowly, afraid the moment might disappear if she moved too quickly. Rachel leaned forward and began explaining the seat controls, but Emily was barely listening. Her attention stayed fixed on Daniel Whitmore. Thank you, she said, voice thick with emotion. Daniel gave a small nod. Get some rest before your interview. Emily wiped at the corner of her eye and smiled. I will. Daniel turned and walked back toward the front of the cabin. The businessman in seat 1B watched him return. He was in his early 60s, grey hair, navy suit, the kind of traveler who had spent decades observing people in quiet airport lounges and boardrooms. When Daniel sat down again, the man lowered his voice. I've been flying for 30 years, he said. I've never seen anything like that. Daniel buckled his seatbelt and glanced toward the window where the airport lights shimmered across the glass. Sometimes the smallest decision tells you the most about a person. The businessman nodded slowly, studying him with renewed respect. Outside, the engines began to stir again. The low mechanical whine rolled through the aircraft like a distant storm waking up. Oh, Flight attendants moved quickly through the aisles, preparing the cabin for departure. The mood inside the plane had shifted entirely. Conversations were lighter. People leaned back into their seats again, relieved. The tension that had once filled the air was gone, replaced with something warmer. Captain Brooks' voice crackled through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We'll be pushing back from the gate shortly." The plane began to move, slowly pulling away from the terminal. Daniel leaned his head back and closed his eyes for the first time since the confrontation. The day had already been longer than expected. But peace rarely lasts long in stories like this. The aircraft had barely reached the taxi lane when the engine slowed again. The sudden shift in movement sent a ripple of confusion through the cabin. Daniel opened his eyes. The plane was turning back toward the gate. A chime sounded overhead. Captain Brooks returned to the intercom. This time, his voice carried a hint of frustration. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've been instructed to return briefly to the gate due to a discrepancy with the luggage manifest. We expect only a short delay." Daniel frowned slightly. Luggage discrepancies after pushback were unusual. His phone buzzed quietly in his pocket. He slipped it out and glanced at the message. It was from his chief of security. "We have a situation at the gate. Another passenger demanding to board. Claims to be related to the removal earlier. Airport Ops wants to let him on to avoid a scene." Daniel exhaled slowly. The engines outside wound down as the plane settled back into its docking position with a heavy metallic thud. The jet bridge reconnected to the aircraft door. The seatbelt sign remained on, but passengers leaned toward the windows to see what was happening. Daniel typed a short reply. "Let him on." The cabin door opened again. The first thing passengers heard was the sound of raised voices echoing from the jet bridge. Then a man appeared in the doorway. He stormed into the aircraft with the kind of energy that sucked the air out of the room. Kevin Caldwell, mid-40s, thick neck, expensive watch gleaming on his wrist. His suit jacket was unbuttoned and twisted slightly as if he had rushed through the terminal without stopping. His face burned red with fury. "Where is she?" he shouted, ignoring the flight attendant standing beside the door. "Where is my wife?" The entire cabin turned toward him. Kevin scanned the rows of first class, breathing hard. His eyes landed first on Daniel sitting calmly in seat 1A. Then they moved to seat 4B, where Emily Parker sat quietly with her medical flashcards stacked beside her. Kevin's finger shot out like a weapon. "Who the hell is that?" he demanded. "That's my wife's seat." Emily shrank back slightly, startled. Daniel unbuckled his seatbelt for the second time that afternoon. He stood slowly and stepped into the aisle between Kevin and the young woman. "Mr. Caldwell, I presume?" Daniel said calmly. Kevin turned toward him with open hostility. His eyes ran over Daniel quickly. The same miscalculation Lauren had made earlier flickered across his face. "Who the hell are you?" Kevin sneered. "Security." Daniel didn't answer the insult. His voice remained level. "Your wife has already been removed from the aircraft." Kevin's eyes widened with disbelief. "Removed?" "She texted me before they took her phone. She said some thug in first class assaulted her." Gasps rippled through the cabin. Daniel tilted his head slightly. Assaulted her. That's right, Kevin snapped. You verbally abused her and stole her seat. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Rachel Morgan stepped forward from the galley, arms crossed. Daniel took one step closer to Kevin Caldwell. The difference in their composure could not have been clearer. One man, shaking with rage. The other, perfectly still. And that, Daniel said quietly, is the story she told you. Kevin puffed out his chest. I'm Kevin Caldwell, Senior Vice President of Apex Fuel Logistics. His voice rose louder, meant for the entire cabin to hear. Our company supplies jet fuel to half the airlines in this airport. He jabbed a finger toward Daniel's chest. One phone call from me, and this plane doesn't leave the ground for a month. Daniel stared at him for a long moment. Then he reached slowly into his pocket again. Kevin's expression faltered slightly. But Daniel didn't pull out a badge this time. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number. The phone rang once. Twice. Kevin Caldwell stood there in the aisle with his arms crossed, wearing the confident smirk of a man who believed power belonged to him. Passengers watched quietly. The tension that had barely settled minutes earlier began climbing again, like pressure building under a sealed lid. Then the call connected. The face of an older man appeared on Daniel Whitmore's screen. Silver hair, thin glasses, a wood-paneled office behind him that looked like the kind of place where billion-dollar decisions were made before lunch. Daniel, the man said with a friendly smile, I thought you were already halfway across the Atlantic. Several passengers leaned slightly closer. Kevin Caldwell's expression flickered. Daniel held the phone up so the man on the screen could see the cabin. I was, Daniel replied calmly. But we had a small interruption. What kind of interruption? Daniel tilted the phone toward Kevin. This gentleman here. The man on the screen squinted slightly. Kevin? The confidence drained from Kevin Caldwell's face so quickly it looked almost physical. John, he said, forcing a nervous laugh. I didn't realize you two knew each other. The man on the screen was Jonathan Reed, Chief Executive Officer of Apex Fuel Logistics, Kevin's boss, the same company Kevin had just threatened to use against Daniel Whitmore. Jonathan leaned closer to the camera. Kevin, he said slowly, what exactly are you doing on Daniel Whitmore's airplane? The cabin had gone completely silent again. Even the flight attendants had stopped moving. Kevin cleared his throat. There's been a misunderstanding, he said quickly. My wife was kicked off this flight by some airline staff and she was removed by airport police, Daniel said calmly. Jonathan Reed's eyebrows lifted. Police? Kevin's jaw tightened. She was harassed, Kevin insisted. This man in seat 1A assaulted her and took her seat. Daniel watched him quietly. Then he spoke. Jonathan, your vice president just threatened to shut down my airline's fuel supply. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Jonathan's smile vanished instantly. Kevin, he said slowly, tell me that is not true. Kevin swallowed. I was defending my wife. Jonathan leaned back in his chair. His expression hardened. Your wife attempted to bribe another passenger, Daniel continued. She insulted my crew and made racially motivated comments about my presence in first class. The silence in the cabin deepened. Kevin's eyes darted toward the watching passengers. The businessman in seat 1B had completely lowered his newspaper now. Every face in the first-class cabin was focused on the phone screen. Jonathan Reed spoke again, voice colder now. "Kevin." "Yes?" "Did you threaten Daniel Whitmore's airline?" Kevin opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. "I didn't know it was him." Jonathan exhaled slowly through his nose. "Kevin, do you have any idea how large the Whitmore aviation account is for us?" Kevin didn't answer. Daniel did. 30% of Apex Logistics' quarterly revenue, he said calmly. Jonathan nodded. "That's correct." Kevin felt the floor tilt under his feet. "Jonathan, this doesn't have to become a—" Jonathan raised a hand. "Stop talking." The words landed like a hammer. The CEO leaned closer to the camera, his voice dropping into a controlled, lethal calm. "You threatened my largest client." Kevin's face went pale. "I didn't realize." "That's the problem," Jonathan said sharply. "You didn't realize." Passengers could feel the shift in power moving through the cabin like a physical wave. Jonathan looked back at Daniel. "Daniel, I apologize for this situation." Daniel nodded once. "I'm sure you'll handle it." Jonathan's eyes moved back to Kevin Caldwell. "Hand your company badge to the nearest flight attendant." Kevin stared at him. "What? You're terminated?" The words echoed through the cabin like a gunshot. Kevin blinked. "Jonathan, you can't fire me like this. I've worked there for 10 years. Jonathan's voice remained calm. "You threatened Daniel Whitmore's airline." Kevin's breathing became uneven. "I was defending my wife. You were embarrassing this company." Kevin stepped forward toward Daniel, panic rising in his voice. "This is insane. You're ruining my career over a seat." Daniel finally stepped closer to him. Their faces were only a few feet apart now. "No," Daniel said quietly. "You ruined your career over arrogance." Kevin's shoulders dropped slightly. For the first time since he boarded the aircraft, he looked unsure of himself. Jonathan spoke again from the phone. "Kevin." "Yes?" "Get off Mr. Whitmore's plane." The call ended. Kevin stood there, staring at the black phone screen. His entire world had just collapsed in the space of 30 seconds. He looked around the cabin again. The passengers were still watching. But this time, there was no sympathy in their eyes. Only quiet judgment. Rachel Morgan stepped forward. "Sir," she said calmly, "I'm going to have to ask you to leave the aircraft." Kevin looked toward Daniel one last time. "You think this is a victory?" he said bitterly. Daniel's voice was quiet. "I think it's accountability." Kevin's shoulders sagged. The arrogance had drained from him completely now. He turned slowly and walked down the aisle toward the open aircraft door. No one said a word. When he stepped through the doorway and disappeared down the jet bridge, Rachel closed the cabin door behind him with a heavy metallic click. The sound echoed through the plane. For one long second, the cabin remained silent. Then the businessman in seat 1B began clapping. Another passenger joined. Then another. Within moments, the entire first-class cabin erupted into applause. Daniel Whitmore did not acknowledge it. He simply sat back down in seat 1A, adjusted the sleeve of his worn blazer, and signaled to Rachel. "A glass of scotch, please." Rachel smiled. "Yes, sir." Outside the window, the aircraft engines roared back to life, and for the second time that day, the plane began to move. But far above the runway lights of New York, a much larger storm was already beginning to form. The aircraft finally lifted off the runway with a long, powerful surge. The engines roared beneath the wings as the plane climbed through the darkening sky over New York. Lights from the city stretched out below like scattered diamonds, fading into the Atlantic night. Inside the cabin, the tension that had ruled the last hour slowly dissolved into the soft rhythm of a long international flight. Seatbelts clicked open. Passengers leaned back. A few quiet conversations resumed. But every now and then, someone glanced toward seat 1A. Daniel Whitmore sat with the same calm posture he had held since boarding. His glass of scotch rested lightly in his hand. The amber liquid barely moved, even as the aircraft climbed through the last layers of cloud. The businessman in seat 1B finally spoke again. "You handled that better than most people would." Daniel took a slow sip before answering. "Anger makes people sloppy." The man nodded thoughtfully. "Still," he said, "most CEOs would have made a bigger scene." Daniel looked out the window. "I didn't need to." Across the cabin, Emily Parker sat in seat 4B, staring quietly at the seat controls as if they might disappear if she blinked. She had never flown business class before. The seat stretched into a bed. There was a reading lamp, a wide table, real glassware instead of plastic. Rachel Morgan approached her with a soft smile. "Can I get you something to drink?" Emily blinked, still processing everything. "Water would be great." Rachel placed a glass on the tray. "You look like you're still in shock." Emily laughed nervously. "I kind of am." Rachel leaned slightly closer. "Study for medical school?" Emily nodded. "Johns Hopkins." Rachel whistled quietly. "That explains the flashcards." Emily glanced toward the front of the cabin. "Is he always like that?" Rachel followed her gaze to Daniel Whitmore. "Like what?" "So calm." Rachel thought about that. "Most of the time." Emily smiled softly. "I thought he was just another passenger when he walked back there." Rachel chuckled. "That's usually how he prefers it." Emily leaned back slowly in the wide seat. "I guess Lauren Caldwell picked the worst possible person to judge." Rachel's smile faded slightly. "People judge fast." She glanced toward Daniel again. "He's been dealing with that his entire life." Up in seat 1A, Daniel Whitmore had closed his eyes for a moment, but his phone vibrated quietly against the armrest. He opened his eyes. 3 missed calls, 7 text messages, all from the same person. Chloe Harrington, his head of public relations in London. Daniel sighed. He already knew what that meant. He opened the first message. "You need to call me immediately." The second message followed. "The video is everywhere." Daniel frowned slightly. "Video?" The third message appeared on screen. "Lauren Caldwell just posted something online." Daniel leaned back in his seat. He opened the link. The video loaded instantly. Lauren Caldwell sat in the back seat of a moving car. Her mascara was slightly smeared, her hair no longer perfect. The lighting made her look fragile. Her voice trembled. "I just want people to know what happened to me today." Daniel watched silently. Lauren sniffed dramatically. "I was flying home with a migraine. I asked a man in first class politely if he would switch seats with me. I even offered him money for the inconvenience." Daniel's jaw tightened slightly. Lauren wiped at her eyes, and he just exploded. He screamed at me. Said I didn't belong there because I was a privileged white woman. Passengers around her on the video shook their heads sympathetically. "He had me arrested," Lauren continued, "just because he's a billionaire." Daniel paused the video. Outside the window, the sky had turned black. The aircraft cruised steadily above the clouds. His phone vibrated again. Chloe calling. He answered. "Daniel." Her voice came through sharp and fast. "Please tell me you've seen the video. I just did." "Good," Chloe said, "because the internet has too." Daniel leaned his head back. "How bad?" 3 million views in under an hour. Daniel was quiet. Chloe continued. "She's spinning the entire story. Says you assaulted her. Says you abused your power to have her arrested." Daniel looked across the cabin. Passengers were watching movies, sleeping, reading, completely unaware of the storm unfolding far below. "What are the networks saying?" he asked. Chloe exhaled slowly. "They're picking it up." Daniel nodded once. "Good." There was a pause on the line. "Good?" Chloe repeated. "Yes." Chloe sounded confused. "Daniel, people are calling you a bully." Daniel opened the video again. Lauren's trembling voice filled the screen. "He said he owned the plane," she told the camera. "He said people like me didn't deserve to sit in first class anymore." Daniel paused the video again. "She's lying," Chloe said. "Yes." "Then why aren't you worried?" Daniel looked toward the small black dome near the cockpit door. The cabin security camera. It had recorded everything. Every word, every dollar bill she waved, every insult. "Because," Daniel said quietly, "she hasn't realized something yet." "What?" Daniel watched the clouds drift slowly past the window. "She's not arguing with me." Chloe waited. Daniel finished the sentence. "She's arguing with evidence." Chloe's voice dropped. "You're going to release the footage." Daniel shook his head slowly. "Not yet." "Daniel, she's destroying your reputation right now." He closed his eyes for a moment. "Let her talk." Chloe went silent. Daniel continued. "Let her tell her story." Outside the aircraft window, the moonlight spread across the clouds like silver. Chloe spoke carefully. "You're setting a trap." Daniel opened his eyes again. "Not a trap." "What then?" Daniel's voice remained calm. "A spotlight." He ended the call. Then he leaned back in his seat again. In seat 4B, Emily Parker had finally fallen asleep. Her flashcards lay scattered across the tray beside her. The plane continued east over the Atlantic, and somewhere far below, Lauren Caldwell was still telling the world her version of the story. She had no idea that every word she spoke was digging the hole deeper, much deeper. By the time the aircraft reached cruising altitude over the Atlantic, Lauren Caldwell's video had crossed 5 million views. Daniel Whitmore didn't need to check again. His phone kept vibrating every few minutes like a restless insect against the armrest. Mentions, notifications, news alerts. The internet had decided the story already. Some headlines were careful. Airline CEO accused of abusing power on flight. Others were less polite. Billionaire throws woman off plane. But the most dangerous ones were the comments. Thousands of them. People who had never stepped foot on that aircraft now argued passionately about what had happened inside it. Daniel leaned back in his seat, the glow of the cabin lights reflecting faintly on the glass of his scotch. Across the aisle, the businessman in seat 1B glanced at him. "Looks like your day isn't getting quieter." Daniel didn't answer right away. His phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Chloe. It was a message from his head of security. "We've got media waiting in Zurich," Daniel typed back a single word. Expected. The man in seat 1B studied him for a moment. "You don't seem very worried." Daniel finally looked at him. "Worry doesn't change facts." The man nodded slowly. "True." But he glanced toward Daniel's phone again. "Public opinion sometimes doesn't care about facts." Daniel took a slow sip of his drink. Public opinion eventually catches up to them. Across the cabin, Emily Parker stirred in her seat. The reading light above her flickered on. She rubbed her eyes and looked around, momentarily confused by the quiet luxury of the cabin. Then she remembered. The first-class seat. The confrontation. The applause. Her gaze drifted toward the front of the plane. Daniel Whitmore sat exactly where she had last seen him. Still calm, still unreadable. Rachel Morgan approached quietly. "Did you sleep?" Emily nodded. "Better than I expected." Rachel smiled. "That seat does help." Emily hesitated before asking the question that had been sitting in her mind. "Is everything okay up front?" Rachel glanced toward Daniel, then back to Emily. "There's some noise online." Emily frowned. "What kind of noise?" Rachel lowered her voice slightly. "The woman who was removed earlier posted a video." Emily's expression darkened. "Oh no." Rachel nodded. "She's claiming the whole thing was reversed." Emily sat up straighter. "But everyone on this plane saw what happened." Rachel gave a small shrug. Unfortunately, the internet wasn't here. Emily stared toward Daniel again. "He doesn't look worried." Rachel followed her gaze. "That's because he isn't." Emily tilted her head slightly. "How can you tell?" Rachel smiled faintly. "I've watched him handle things a lot worse than this." Up in seat 1A, Daniel's phone buzzed again. Another call from Chloe. He answered. "She's going on television," Chloe said immediately. Daniel's eyebrows lifted slightly. "When?" "Tomorrow morning." "Which network?" "Good Morning America." Daniel leaned back in his seat again. The businessman in seat 1B pretended not to listen, but clearly was. Chloe continued. "She's framing it as a story about powerful men abusing women." Daniel remained quiet. "Daniel," Chloe said carefully, "if we don't respond soon, the narrative becomes reality." Daniel looked at the small security camera mounted near the cockpit door, the same camera that had recorded everything. Every insult, every lie, every dollar bill Lauren Caldwell had waved in his face. "Has anyone asked for our statement?" he asked. "Every major outlet. And what did you tell them? That we're reviewing the situation." Daniel nodded once. Chloe's voice sharpened. "You're enjoying this?" "No." "You're letting her talk?" "Yes." Chloe sighed heavily. "You're waiting for her to commit to the lie." Daniel looked out the window again. The moon hung over the Atlantic like a pale coin. "Yes." Chloe was silent for several seconds. Then she spoke again. "The longer this goes on, the bigger it gets." "That's the point. You want it bigger?" "I want it visible." Chloe understood immediately. "You're going to release the footage after the interview." Daniel said nothing, but the silence was confirmation. Chloe exhaled slowly. "That's going to destroy her." Daniel's voice remained steady. She made the choice. Across the aisle, the businessman leaned slightly closer. "Sounds like you're setting a trap." Daniel ended the call. He turned toward the man beside him. "I'm setting a record straight." The businessman nodded slowly. "That woman picked the wrong man to lie about." Daniel shook his head. "No." The man raised an eyebrow. "No?" Daniel's voice lowered slightly. "She picked the wrong moment. Because at that exact moment, far below the aircraft, Lauren Caldwell was sitting inside a brightly lit television studio preparing to tell millions of viewers the story she had invented. And she had no idea that every word she was about to say would be compared against something far more powerful than her version of events. Evidence. Back in seat 4B, Emily Parker watched the clouds pass beneath the wing. "Rachel, yes? Do you think he planned this?" Rachel followed her gaze to the front of the cabin. Daniel Whitmore sat perfectly still, watching the night sky, waiting. Rachel smiled softly. "He doesn't plan revenge." Emily blinked. "No?" Rachel shook her head. "He plans timing." The aircraft continued flying east through the darkness, somewhere over the Atlantic Ocean, carrying one man who had just become the center of a story the entire world was about to watch explode. And he was letting it happen. The aircraft touched down in Zurich just after sunrise. The landing was smooth, almost gentle, the wheels kissing the runway with a quiet thud that barely disturbed the calm inside the cabin. Outside the windows, the pale morning light spread across the Alps like a silver veil. For most passengers, it was the end of a long flight. For Daniel Whitmore, it was the beginning of something else. His phone vibrated again, the moment the aircraft slowed on the taxiway. "Chloe." He answered before she could speak. She went on air. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. "And? You need to see it." Daniel glanced around the cabin. Passengers were already standing, reaching for overhead bins, stretching stiff legs. Rachel Morgan was helping Emily Parker gather her things from seat 4B. "Send it." The video arrived instantly. Daniel pressed play. The television studio was bright and warm, designed to look welcoming. Lauren Caldwell sat on a white couch beside the host, dressed very differently from the day before. The sharp white jacket was gone. In its place, she wore a soft pink sweater, her hair pulled back gently. No heavy makeup. She looked fragile. She looked like a victim. Daniel watched silently. "I was just trying to get home," Lauren said on the screen, her voice trembling perfectly. "I had a terrible migraine, and I asked a man in first class if he would mind switching seats." The host leaned forward sympathetically. "And what happened next?" Lauren's eyes filled with tears. "He started yelling at me, saying I didn't belong there, saying people like me always think the rules don't apply." Daniel paused the video. The cabin door opened. Passengers began filing slowly down the jet bridge. Emily approached Daniel hesitantly. "Mr. Whitmore?" Daniel slipped the phone into his pocket. "Yes? I just wanted to thank you again." Her voice carried the same sincerity he had heard the night before. Daniel nodded once. "Good luck with your interview." Emily smiled nervously. "I'll try not to embarrass your investment." Daniel allowed the smallest hint of a smile. "I doubt you will." Rachel stepped forward beside her. "I'll escort Miss Parker to her connecting flight." Daniel nodded. "Please do." Emily walked down the aisle toward the exit. Halfway to the door, she glanced back once more. Daniel Whitmore had already turned toward the window again, watching the airport come alive outside. Moments later, the cabin emptied. Captain Brooks stepped out from the cockpit. "Quite a flight," he said quietly. Daniel stood and shook his hand. "Thank you for your professionalism." The captain hesitated. "You're going to have quite a crowd out there." Daniel already knew. Through the window he could see them. Reporters, cameras, microphones. A wall of flashing lights waiting beyond the glass doors of the terminal. Chloe's voice echoed in his memory. "The video is everywhere." Daniel adjusted the sleeve of his blazer and picked up the worn leather duffel bag. Then he walked toward the door. The moment he stepped into the terminal, the noise hit him like a wave. "Mr. Whitmore, is it true you had a passenger arrested? Did you abuse your authority? Did you threaten a woman on your own airplane?" Security moved quickly around him, forming a barrier as microphones pushed forward. Daniel kept walking, his expression unreadable. A reporter stepped directly into his path. Young, aggressive, the kind who smelled a headline. "Mr. Whitmore," the reporter said loudly, "Lauren Caldwell says you told her she didn't belong in first class because she was white." The crowd leaned closer. Cameras lifted higher. Daniel stopped. The entire room went silent. He looked directly at the camera. His voice was calm. "The truth has a way of traveling farther than lies." The reporter frowned. "What does that mean?" Daniel held his gaze for a moment longer. "Wait for the black box." Then he stepped forward again. Security guided him through the crowd and into a waiting black sedan. The door closed with a quiet thud. Inside the car, the silence felt almost luxurious. Chloe's face appeared on the screen, built into the console. "You're trending everywhere," she said immediately. Daniel loosened his collar slightly. "I assumed as much. She accused you of racism on live television." Daniel nodded. "I saw." Chloe leaned closer to the camera. "Daniel, we need to release the footage." "Not yet." Her frustration showed instantly. "What do you mean, not yet?" She just repeated the entire story in front of millions of viewers. Daniel looked out the window. Zurich passed by in clean, quiet streets. People drinking coffee. Cyclists crossing intersections. A normal morning. Exactly, he said. Chloe blinked. You're letting her finish the lie. Daniel nodded. Yes. Chloe's voice dropped. You're going to release the footage today? Yes. When? Daniel leaned back into the leather seat. After the story peaks. Chloe understood immediately. You want maximum visibility. I want maximum clarity. Chloe shook her head slowly. That video is going to destroy her. Daniel's voice remained calm. No. Chloe frowned. No? Daniel looked back at the screen. She destroyed herself. Chloe was quiet. Then she asked the question that had been sitting in her mind all night. You're very confident about what that footage shows. Daniel's eyes didn't move. I was there. Outside the car, the city slipped past quietly. Behind them, the media storm continued growing. Lauren Caldwell was still speaking on television, still repeating her version of events, still convincing thousands of strangers that she was the victim. But somewhere inside the servers of Whitmore Aviation sat a recording that told a very different story. A story captured by 4 cameras, crystal clear audio, every word, every gesture. And Daniel Whitmore had just told the entire world exactly where to look. The black box. At 9:18 that morning, while Lauren Caldwell was still sitting under the warm studio lights in New York, the official Whitmore Aviation account posted a single message. No commentary, no anger, no explanation. Just one sentence. Watch with sound on. And beneath it, a video. The internet moved faster than anyone in the television studio could imagine. Within seconds, the post had thousands of shares. Within a minute, it was climbing the trending charts across every major platform. Within 3 minutes, producers inside the Good Morning America control room were shouting into their headsets. The segment was still live. Lauren Caldwell sat on the couch beside the host, dabbing her eyes with a tissue as she finished another carefully practiced sentence. He stood up and started shouting, she said, voice trembling. He told me that people like me thought we owned the world. The host leaned forward sympathetically. That must have been terrifying. Lauren nodded slowly. I thought I was going to be thrown off the plane for simply asking for help. In the control room, a producer suddenly slapped the desk. Stop everything! Another producer stared at the screen of her laptop. Is this real? The video from Whitmore Aviation had already reached 200,000 views. It was not a grainy cell phone recording. It was crystal clear. Multiple camera angles, high definition. Studio microphones picking up every word inside the cabin. The producer grabbed the headset again. Tell the host. Back on the set, the host touched the small earpiece hidden beneath her hair. Her expression changed instantly. The warmth drained from her face. She glanced down at the tablet resting on the table in front of her. Then she looked back up at Lauren Caldwell. Ms. Caldwell, the host said carefully. Lauren blinked. Yes? We're receiving new information regarding the incident you described. Lauren's stomach tightened. What kind of information? The host turned the tablet slightly so Lauren could see the screen. Lauren leaned closer. Her face went pale. The video was already playing. It showed the first-class cabin of Flight 402. Lauren entering the aisle. Lauren pointing at seat 1A. Lauren saying the words that had started everything. "You don't belong here." Lauren jerked upright. "No." The host continued speaking, her voice losing its earlier sympathy. "Whitmore Aviation has just released the full cabin security footage from the flight." The studio audience murmured. Lauren's hands began to shake. "That video is fake," she said quickly. The host raised an eyebrow. "It appears to include synchronized audio from the aircraft microphones." Lauren's voice rose. "It's edited!" Behind her, the large studio monitor lit up. The video expanded across the entire screen. The audience gasped. The footage showed everything. Lauren waving the $100 bill in Daniel Whitmore's face. Lauren snapping her fingers at Rachel Morgan. Lauren saying the words that now echoed through millions of televisions. "Look at him. He's probably staff flying standby." The host watched the screen for several seconds. Then she turned back toward Lauren. "Ms. Caldwell, you told us a moment ago that Mr. Whitmore shouted at you." Lauren's lips parted, but no words came out. The host tapped the tablet again. "In the footage we just watched, Mr. Whitmore barely raises his voice." Lauren's eyes darted toward the cameras, toward the audience, toward the screen behind her, where her own actions played in brutal clarity. "That video is manipulated," she said weakly. The host tilted her head. "The footage also shows you offering him money to leave his seat." Lauren grabbed the microphone clipped to her sweater. "This is a setup." The audience was no longer murmuring. They were booing. Lauren stood abruptly, the microphone wire pulling tight across the floor. "You can't show that," she shouted. "You made the story public when you came on this program," the host replied coolly. Lauren tore the microphone off and threw it onto the couch. "I'm suing this network." She turned and stormed off the set, nearly tripping over a camera cable as she disappeared behind the curtain. The studio audience erupted. But the real explosion was happening online. Within minutes, the Whitmore Aviation video had reached 10 million views. Clips of Lauren Caldwell offering the bribe spread across social media like wildfire. News anchors who had been cautiously criticizing Daniel Whitmore hours earlier now replayed the footage in stunned silence. Commentators reversed their opinions in real time. The narrative had flipped completely. Inside the black sedan moving through Zurich, Daniel Whitmore watched the coverage on the car's display screen. Chloe Harrington appeared beside the footage through a live video call. "Well," she said quietly. Daniel said nothing. On the screen, the host of Good Morning America addressed the viewers again. "For those just joining us, newly released footage contradicts several claims made earlier by Lauren Caldwell regarding yesterday's incident on a Whitmore Aviation flight." The clip replayed again. Lauren's voice. "You don't belong here." The businessman in seat 1B lowering his newspaper. Daniel Whitmore calmly asking Rachel if the cockpit door was open. Chloe shook her head slowly. That was brutal. Daniel leaned back slightly in the seat. She chose the stage. Chloe nodded. "And you brought the lights." Her phone buzzed suddenly. She glanced down, then looked back up with raised eyebrows. "Oh." Daniel noticed the shift. What? Chloe smiled faintly. The New York Times just published the investigation. Daniel said nothing. Chloe read quickly. They've been digging into the Caldwell family all week. She scrolled through the article. Oh, this is going to hurt. Daniel looked toward the screen. What did they find? Chloe exhaled slowly. Apparently, Lauren Caldwell's father sits on the zoning board for JFK Airport. Daniel waited. And the same board has been blocking Whitmore Aviation's expansion permits for the last 2 years. Daniel's expression didn't change. Chloe continued reading. And there's evidence that the consulting company her father recommended for airport negotiations has financial ties to Apex Fuel Logistics. Daniel nodded slightly. The pieces fit together exactly the way he had expected. Chloe leaned back in her chair. Well? Daniel looked out the window again. The Swiss mountains stood quiet in the distance. Chloe finished the thought. You didn't just win an argument on that airplane. Daniel's voice remained calm. No. Chloe smiled. You exposed an entire system. Daniel watched the sunlight slide across the glass. Outside the car, the world continued moving as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But somewhere across the Atlantic, the Caldwell family emir was beginning to collapse, and it had started with a single sentence spoken in the aisle of an airplane. You don't belong here. By noon in New York, the Caldwell name had become toxic. The story moved faster than any corporate crisis team could control. News helicopters circled above a quiet neighborhood in the Hamptons. Reporters crowded the sidewalk outside a large white house where Lauren Caldwell had hosted charity galas only months earlier. Now cameras waited for a different reason. At 12:30 in the afternoon, the New York District Attorney's Office released a statement. A grand jury investigation had been opened. Charges under review included racketeering, wire fraud, and bribery related to airport zoning approvals and fuel contracts. Within 20 minutes, another headline appeared. The fashion company where Lauren Caldwell held her vice president title issued a public statement. We are appalled by the conduct and dishonesty displayed by Ms. Lauren Caldwell. Effective immediately, her employment with our company has been terminated. Across television networks and financial news channels, analysts began discussing the fallout. Apex Fuel Logistics stock dropped 7% before the closing bell. Commentators replayed the same video clip again and again. Lauren Caldwell standing in the aisle of the aircraft, the $100 bill in her hand, her voice sharp and dismissive. You don't belong here. The clip had now crossed 40 million views. Inside a quiet hotel suite overlooking Zurich, Daniel Whitmore turned off the television. The room fell silent. No reporters, no cameras. Just the faint sound of wind brushing against the glass windows and the distant hum of the traffic far below. Daniel walked toward the window and looked out across the Alps. The mountains were calm, unmoved by the storm that had erupted across 2 continents. His phone vibrated gently on the table behind him. A new number. He answered. Hello? The voice on the other end sounded nervous but bright. Mr. Whitmore. Daniel recognized it instantly. Emily Parker. Yes, sir. He could hear wind in the background and the distant echo of airport announcements. I just wanted to tell you something. Daniel leaned lightly against the window. How did the interview go? There was a pause. Then Emily laughed softly, the sound full of disbelief. They offered me the fellowship. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. That's excellent. I got there early, she said quickly. I was rested. I wasn't panicking about studying on the plane. I felt ready. Daniel could hear the smile in her voice. They said they had never seen someone answer questions so calmly. That sounds like a good start for a doctor. Emily took a small breath. I know it sounds dramatic, but that seat changed everything. Daniel turned slightly, watching the quiet city below. It wasn't the seat. What do you mean? You did the work. You studied while everyone else slept. Emily went quiet for a moment. I guess that's true. Daniel picked up his phone from the table. I made a note on your frequent flyer account. Emily sounded confused. My account? You now have lifetime diamond status with Whitmore Aviation. Emily gasped softly. Sir, that's too much. Daniel's voice stayed gentle. Doctors save lives. The least we can do is make sure they arrive rested. Emily laughed again, this time through happy tears. I don't even know what to say. Say thank you by doing good work. I will. There was another pause. Then Emily said something quietly. Yesterday was the first time I felt like someone saw me. Daniel looked out at the mountains again. Keep doing the work. People will see. Emily's voice softened. Thank you, Mr. Whitmore. You're welcome, Dr. Parker. The call ended. Daniel placed the phone back on the table. The room felt still again. Across the world in New York, agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation escorted Richard Caldwell out of his house in handcuffs, while cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions he could no longer answer. Lauren Caldwell's social media accounts disappeared within hours. The Caldwell name, once carried with entitlement and influence, collapsed under the weight of evidence and exposure. Daniel Whitmore did not watch it unfold. He had already moved on. A meeting with shareholders waited in 20 minutes. He walked to the mirror and straightened the sleeve of his navy blazer, the same one he had worn on the airplane. For a moment he studied his reflection. Not a billionaire, not a headline, just a man who understood something most people eventually learned the hard way. Power rarely needs to shout. It simply waits. Daniel picked up the worn leather duffel bag his father had given him years ago and headed for the door. As he stepped into the hallway of the quiet Zurich hotel, the storm of yesterday already felt distant. But somewhere on the internet, millions of people were still replaying that moment inside Seat 1A. The moment arrogance collided with reality. All because someone looked at a man in a simple blazer and decided he didn't belong. And that is how Daniel Whitmore didn't just win an argument on an airplane. He exposed corruption, destroyed a lie, and reminded the world of a simple truth. You never truly know who you are speaking to. Treat everyone with respect, because arrogance screams, but real power whispers. If this story moved you, take a moment to support the channel by hitting like and subscribe so more people can hear stories like this. And in the comments below, write 3 words that capture the lesson of this story.